Welcome to Dr. Lottie Science with Soul. I'm Dr. Lottie and the host of this podcast. Today, I'm really excited to introduce Steve Noack. Steve Noack is a near-death, out-of-body survivor and zero-point quantum healer. A quantum healer has the ability to create a high-frequency life force energy, and then using that energy in order to place this field of high energy around an area of pain, stress, inflammation, or disease. The intention of this process is to amplify our body's natural healing ability. At a very young age, Steve was struck by a motor vehicle, and this event bioelectrically connected him to the quantum field. During Steve's near-death experience, he experienced sitting in the presence of a being comprised solely of light. The being of light revealed to Steve the quantum field and its connection to humanity's healing contained in its divine blueprint. Steve's gift enables him to stimulate emotional and physical healing from any distance through quantum entanglement and photonics. Every living being emits biophotons, or weak radiation generated as bioelectrical field. And this is what links all living beings to collective consciousness. By using his unique gifts, he is able to create a zero-point field or ground state for the bioelectrical nervous system, and in doing so, open pathways for healing. Steve began using his gifts to give back to humanity by first studying Usui Reiki over 10 years ago, and his spiritual understanding and scope of healing abilities has only grown from there. He now teaches, heals, and coaches clients all around the world. Steve works with hundreds of clients of all ages and backgrounds, guiding them on their journey to finding freedom from pain and trauma. Steve has a wide range of experience healing emotional and physical disharmony. So welcome, Steve. I can't wait for you to share your near-death experiences and your journey becoming a healer with the listeners today.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here. I never thought I'd be here doing this, but I'm here. So
I know you had two near-death experiences. So one happened when you were just 4 years old, and then the second one when you were, I believe, 33.
yeah, I would say it was more of an out of body. It was I rolled a car over 5 times. So it was pretty bad, but it wasn't clinically dead. But the first one was the clinical and basically gone, and that was the one I remembered. And the second one and the emotions to do with the second one seemed to bring something in again and open me up.
So what happened? Start with the one when you were 4 years old. What happened?
Well, I was driving a big wheel, which is like a small plastic tricycle. And I was across the street from my house, and my brother came down to the sidewalk across the street and said, "Hey, we're going to the mall." And I was super excited. So I shot out down the driveway, down into the road in between two parked cars without looking, and there was a car coming. And so this car hit me, and I went underneath the car. The only thing that saved me was my big wheel that got stuck underneath the back tire of the car. And I was dragged probably like another 20 feet. And pretty bad injuries: collapsed lung, broken ribs, broken shoulder, clavicle, shoulder blade, a few more things that my mom has a hard time remembering. But what I remember is a blur, and then seeing myself, and I'm looking at myself all of a sudden, and my eyes roll in the back of my head, and then it fades to black, and then it opens up again. And I'm leaning on someone, and I'm opening my eyes, and my head is down, and I'm in almost like a crouched, leaning on someone to the side position. And as I open my eyes, I notice the bottom of like silver hair, and it's almost touching the floor. And I see the same color of like a robe. And I'm thinking this is a person up to this point, and I'm just waking up like kind of confused. And when I turned to look at them, instead of a face, they only had light for a face. And it was a hooded figure basically made out of light. And I asked what happened. They told me everything would be all right. Um, that I was in an accident, basically. And I remember thinking, we're speaking without speaking. Um, and they were comforting me. And I remember looking around, and I was in like an empty room, basically. And as I stared at this being's face, it was like I was being pulled into it. And then suddenly, as I got closer and I could feel what to me I would describe as heaven, even though I didn't have a recollection of it. It was like I could see people playing, and I could see the waves of joy and happiness and peace and love and all that coming off of them. And I instantly knew it like it's like somebody nails a nail of truth into your soul. And I instantly knew there was no suffering there, there was no pain there, and I wanted to go. And the being basically said, it's not your time, we have something else to show you. Later on they told me they would be back, uh, also that I wouldn't remember a lot of uh, what we talked about until I was older and I could process it and understand it. And it was true, because when I was 4, it was very hard to remember. I knew something had happened that was very different, but I couldn't access the memories until that voice returned the second time. So they brought me to, like, it was like I was instantly in a place where I could see reality, but I could see a field behind it. And it was like a blueprint. And they told me that our energy builds our reality between us and this field, the quantum field, and that each human being had a blueprint there, or like almost like a root file on a computer, uh, where it's like perfect and you can restart the program again and it's clean and it's pure. But we had to claim it. And then they showed me a beam of energy in the center of like a medicine wheel. And they said, this is how you come in to this body. This is what you are. You are the energy of love. That's your identity. And then you spend your energy to experience reality on a quantum level and exchange energies, emotions, things like that. So that's when they told me you can retrieve the lost pieces of your soul, basically the parts of you that you put out there, because energy can't be destroyed, it can only be transformed. So the parts of you that you extended out there for past identities, old relationships, they still exist in a part of our consciousness in our quantum reality. So they taught me to speak to them and to command them and understand that they were stored in the cellular memory as negative charges, and they were sort of bands of information that run from the energy center through our brain, through our mind, through our consciousness, basically. Anyway, that's a mouthful.
The first time they showed you things, but you don't quite remember, and then all this happened the second time you had a near-death experience.
Yeah, I lived a pretty normal life, even though things were a little different. I was always a little different, and I knew something had happened. I couldn't remember what had happened. I could vaguely see if you're almost trying to remember what you had for lunch 2 weeks ago. It was like that, but then it became clear when that voice returned. And that was right before surgery, where I got very anxious and I was getting ready to get up and leave. And I was overwhelmed with anxiety, and I had never felt like that. It was like a wave hit me. And I was about to sit up, and then the opposite wave hit me. And it was like peace. And I instantly knew everything was going to be okay. And it was that feeling again of being there along with the voice of everything's going to be okay. And that was the same thing, same voice. And that's when vision started, and I started seeing like projections of energy out into the field and experiencing what people would label as psychic things, but I understand more as my energetics interacting with the quantum reality.
So that second near-death experience happened when you had a car crash, right? When you were 33, you rolled your
Yeah, it
car.
was short. Yeah. Yeah. Flipped a car over doing 75 miles an hour 5 times. Um, 5 people in the car. 2 of them flew out of the car. It was just another miraculous, everybody walks away incident to add to the list.
Mm-hmm. So then after you had the second near-death experience when you were 33, and you're seeing, you know, the field and the quantum field, and you understand that we're projecting that energy out into that field. I mean, did this change your life at all, or?
Yeah, it definitely upset the balance of everything that was normal because I was a retail store manager at GameStop at the time. And I started to feel people's emotions and hear their thoughts like in my head. And I thought I was crazy, but I started testing it. Uh, I would ask them if they wanted a bag for their order. I would ask them certain things in my mind and then ask them out loud to see if they matched. And they matched. And then I would have incidents where I would be overcome with emotion that was just out in the field that wasn't my own. And it was like I couldn't function at work because I was integrating into a whole nother level that I expanded into. And now I had to process it, and it was very hard to process. It kind of changed who I was. Like it started burning away everything that was false because all of a sudden I could feel what was true, and I had to accept it and sort of integrate it and be self accountable. Um, Things like that for what I create that didn't resonate with love. It was like an instant drop of a sun in my stomach. And it was like a charge. And I learned I had to feed this charge rather than feed this other charge that created a lower part of me. And I started looking at it as like a game of energy. Okay, I'm playing this character. I need to feed it this type of charge and not create so much of that, and release the patterns and habits that are associated, things like that.
So then how did you figure out, how did you then all of a sudden become a healer? Is this something that transpired over several years and you kind of moved in that direction, or how did you figure that out?
Well, the first time it happened, I was working and an elderly woman fell outside of my store out on the cement. She was in a good deal of pain um, for a minute or two, moaning and groaning. And I put my hand on her back when I got out there because I went out there, I was the first one there. And she looked at me and she said, I'm all warm and I don't feel any pain. And then I didn't, my mind noted it at the time, but I just stayed with her until EMTs came. And then when I got back to work, I thought about it. And then I started to notice change and just people change in people, and people were guided to me by like, hey, can you help me? Hey, can you help me? And a lot of it was because they aligned with sort of the message that I spoke at the time. And it just snowballed. And I started to study Reiki originally to explain what was going on with myself because I wanted to understand it. Um, and it grew from there. I studied Asui Reiki probably 10 to 15 years ago, up to Reiki master teacher. I still teach that here and there. As a matter of fact, I have a student now. And then it grew throughout the years as I adopted new studies and instituted new embodiments of more of a purification, and looking at this as like a life force energy, but it's also data, and creating, doing more purification and sort of creating a larger bandwidth, allowing myself to give more data, more frequency as a channel, things like that. And I really resonate with the message of Christ on that and the ascension, you know.
So now, for how many years have you been working as a healer?
Probably about 7 to 10, I would say. It had originally started just being in situations where people needed help, or people reaching out, and snowballed from there. Somebody's like, hey, you should do this for work. And it literally just allows me to be able to do it for work and maintain it, as opposed to being at another job where I work with elderly who have Alzheimer's and dementia. Pretty much I would be working there much more, and I wouldn't be available for healing. But about 7 to 10 years, learning and practicing and honing and adjusting and becoming more humble so you can give more of a potent frequency to people.
And why is it important to be more humble?
For me, I think it makes me feel more pure. It makes me feel lighter in a quicker sense. It's almost like that helper's high, where that term coined in the 80s, where you have a rush of basically chemicals, but also energy after helping someone,
Mm-hmm.
and you do it honestly and you just leave. Um, Bringing the guy gas on the side of the highway and saying, hey, see you later, and not asking for anything. It was like, to me, I figured out a formula where you can keep adding to that charge. And I spent a lot of time in nature, a lot of time claiming my space back and understanding that my consciousness is divine space, and claiming it back from the critic and from the self that I created growing up. Because, you know, I had my share of things to conquer, to understand them in order to also to help others, you know, who are going through it. And the pain helped me develop empathy too. You know, it was like I could finally start to empathize when I had enough pain with what others go through.
You mentioned that you work with dementia and Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
What improvements have you seen with these people? Is it a physical improvement, a spiritual improvement, energetic, emotional? What shifts have you noticed?
I've seen all of the above, all different for different people. Mostly the underlying theme seems to be a different type of energy, more connection to their youthful wanting to engage in certain activities and things like that. It's almost like they have that youthful charge again in most respects.
Yeah, it's
Because
fascinating.
have you ever seen a radio that has no batteries, but you can wind it and it will play for a little while?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same deal. You're looking to charge yourself with that electrostatic charge, and that's what keeps you in that connected to those higher spaces that just allow things to flow and keep you unattached from things weighing on your emotions and pulling you into things that really feed on your emotions and drain you.
When you met those light beings that were just made of light, um, what would you call them? A light being, or an angel, or a spirit guide, or God, or divine force, or how do you look at that?
I later understood them to be angels, like hunting for name and things like that. Never really much success with that. It was more about like, okay, just focus on being present, you know. but angel was definitely the one.
And do you still see these light beings or angels, or you just have this connection now?
I've felt them and seen them, very rarely seen them, like maybe once or twice, where it's almost like you snap into almost like a daydream state, and I see a field of energy, and it basically encompasses the shape, and I can feel it, and then I snap back to regular reality, and then I'm seeing it with my physical eyes, and it's not there. Things like that. A lot of different interactions, um, speaking with and having visions, and with clients where they lay down and they have visions of all kinds of things, and I'm floored because for me it's like I grew up pretty regular. I had this thing happen. Here it is, something happens again, and now this has happened. And for me, everything they tell me is like new. I'm listening to it and going, no, that's not me. That's somebody else. That's some other character.
Do you feel that you are still you, or do you feel like somebody else went into your body?
I feel like sometimes, yeah, it's like somebody else is using a game controller. Maybe I'm playing myself from some other place, but it was like when I integrated, I lost a lot of my interests. I had to do other things to sustain my higher state of being, that peace and those things that would allow me to connect to God. When I had that shift and that voice returned, I started going to every church I could find to talk to somebody. Didn't matter the denomination, but I was going to every church I could find. Um, I was looking on the outside for what was inside of me. And I learned to connect to feeling and allowing feeling to flow through me and interpret those signals. And that's eventually what led me to that, back to that oneness that I felt when I had my NDE.
So when you're looking at having been in this other dimension, so to speak, does which seems more real, the earthly dimension or the dimension when you're out of body?
I would say the other dimension still, even now, it's like I feel more relatable or related to that other 97% of the spectrum of invisible light we can't see. We only see 3%. So I feel more relatable with that because I understand behind everything is energy and people's stored intentions and all these, um, let's say, false figures created in people's different realities, and they're all interconnected and networking, and it's much more connected to that reality because I'm aware of my power as a creator to either find someone, create, destroy, etc., etc.
When you're thinking about how we come to exist in this dimension, would you say, I know you mentioned it's like you come in like a file on a computer into this dimension. Do you feel like we're living, it's almost like we're living in a game that is controlled, that we're controlling ourselves, we're controlling our outcome, or how do you look at it?
I know for sure I'm energy in this body, and that people aren't their bodies, they're the energy controlling their body. They're part of God. They're all one, but a lot of them are separated from that remembrance. I believe it could either be a quantum experience that we're having, um, in matter, and or it can be spirit, or it can be the same thing. And we start to have that understanding with quantum physics and things like photons and spirit. then how photons can affect other photons and cause people to vibrate and exchange information and things like that on an intuitive level.
So do you think that life is eternal? Do we go on to some other dimension of existence after our physical death?
Yeah, I know for sure, at least for me. Like, I can't define anyone else's beliefs, but I can say I had none at four. And I know for sure by the love I feel now and the connectedness that we continue to grow and grow as a charge of love and hopefully return as love at the end of our life. But that charge of love, and that's why the masters tell us to love, will get us to where we need to be in higher dimensions. I believe we also have to work and grow in other dimensions when we pass if we're not vibrating at the same rate as, say, heaven, where only love is allowed and only peace is allowed.
So when you're working now as a healer,
Mm-hmm.
how do you tune into what it is that that person needs? Do you just, hear it, see it, feel it? Do you use your hands, or how does that, if somebody saw you, came to you for healing, how would that look?
Mm-hmm. Well, I would guide them in the beginning to basically connect to something I saw during my NDE, which I call the Trinity Circuit, and which is basically asking pure or Holy Spirit to enter your consciousness from above, asking what would be love, many words, the Christ, Buddha, Krishna, the singularity to expand within you, and asking God or source to surround you. And what we're looking to do is create a field here of higher vibrational energy uh, that's going to help you basically sustain the higher self that's more conducive to healing and peace and unity. I would guide them to connect to that circuit. I would guide them to do some breath work. I would guide them to also claim their divine blueprint, which I came to know later in my studies might be the promise of Christ. And there seemed to be a lot of similarities in the things that I experienced and I was told that were represented in other ways in religions and things like that. And I came to understand it by feeling. So when I connect with them, I can feel their energy sort of flowing through me, and I can feel how dense or light it is, and cause the cellular memory to gather and create what's known as action potential, where the negative discharges and the positive basically takes over that space. Hopefully, I answered you on that.
Yeah. Um, so you're talking a lot about, chemistry and physics. Did you know any of this before your near-death experience, or this is something you've just had to unravel after your near-death experience to try and understand it?
Negative. I did not know anything. I was basically um, going to work as a regular person, and it was like then the voice came back, and it was like all these things would pop in my head, and I would interact with people, and I would know the reason behind certain things, and I would feel it, and I would be like having an interaction behind the interaction, and I was trying to really balance the two. Um, and I would get all this information and nobody wanted to hear it. Everybody thought I was nuts. They wanted me to see a shrink. Um, everything under the sun, basically. I wound up going separate ways with the mother of my daughter at the time, which is fine and everything. But it was like it brought me into a different space where I valued different things and I didn't align. And it was like my soul needed to take a certain path. And it was like I was being guided, and I don't want to say controlled because that's harsh, but it was like I was being pushed a certain way to release a lot of the ties and patterns and habits that I went through when I was young. So there was like a lot of guidance there.
So if you were going to describe yourself when you were young and the way you are today, it's like you're a different person.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I fed on different things. One was of the earthly self, where you feed on the flesh, and one feeds on the spirit. And I just learned the value of purity and what it feels like and what kind of reality you can feel when you're carrying that kind of charge in you and you look at yourself and your consciousness as a sacred garden. And then it was like once I started learning I had something that I could hand people, it helped me find that purpose for myself too. And I was like, listen, I was unworthy at one point. I was the bad guy at one point. I went through addiction at one point because I played sports, I had car accidents, and now I rely solely on energetics and commanding density and pain to leave my body, to gather together as one charge, basically, from cellular memory, from subconscious, and basically cleanse its way out. Um, Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. I know in a different interview you talked about how it was you felt like there were shadows that were watching you. Can you talk
Yeah,
about
there
that?
was at one point where I was like, somebody hit a switch. It was like somebody hit a light switch. All of a sudden, I could see silhouettes that were some were smoky color, some were darker. Then it was like they would go past, and I would catch a glimpse of them. And at first, I was like, am I going crazy?" And eventually, I noticed them, and they became more prominent. And eventually, they began to speak, and it was almost like they were having a limited amount of interaction where they only wanted to pound you down. They wanted to talk bad to you and be a critic and tell you you're not going anywhere with your life. It was almost like you were having a bad mental health day on steroids. And it was being projected around me. And then in that moment, I understood intuitively I need to change the frequency. I need to change my energy to release these parts that were actually myself that were being broadcast, and now I was sort of seeing them and reflecting and receiving it back. And I got on a quest of becoming accountable for everything I created and any pain that I handed off to the world, and kind of eliminating that part of myself, or at least being able to process in the moment of now as it arises, that part, and just releasing that.
So as you're going through all these changes and people think you should see a shrink, um, what did your family look like? Your parents, your brother, spouses? Did they?
Pretty. Everybody thought I was nuts. I mean, I would have too. So all of a sudden talking about God and quantum physics and things like that, and I have to understand it from their perspective, to where I would have been like, "What the heck is going on?" Um, but it really separated who loved you and who judged you. It revealed it, and that was the beautiful part. Was the more I embraced that energy that was burning in my center and began to follow it, the more I embraced my true self and saw what was false and what was true around me.
Such a fascinating journey. How it completely changed your life.
And eventually they got to see that I was helping people and working and healing people, because I was working at a retreat, and my mother went to a store and bumped into somebody, and they just happened to be talking about having a session with me at the retreat. And she said, "Oh, I had an entity and I didn't tell them, and it left during our session and this and that." And So it was almost like I started to understand, and you will know them by their fruit. It was like just do and create and have that intimate connection and relationship between you and creation and create, and then people will come to your experience, you know.
Yeah, that's just beautiful. I love how your mom overheard other people talking. It was almost like confirmation for her that,
Hmm.
oh, that is my son and he is a healer now. So, what are you working on now? Are you working as a healer? How do people find you?
Working as a healer, I do some coaching for people that like the more holistic spiritual based counseling, things like that. um, but the healing, reconnecting, um, clearing of basically a lot of the nervous system programs, things like that. um, Working on a book, but that will probably take some time. It seems like it's taking time to really put together, but it's something that's been in the works. They can reach me at Trinity Healing Reiki, Reiki, at gmail.com. Trinity Healing Reiki at gmail.com, or Trinity Quantum Health.com. TrinityQuantumHealth.com.
Okay, and I'll make sure to put the trinityquantumhealth.com in the
Mm-hmm.
podcast notes as well, so people can just click on it and find you. But before we wrap up, for people out there listening, thinking, wow, what a journey this man has had. Is there any advice that you would give to the listeners about how to live their life?
I would say don't trade your identity for approval. Form that relationship between who you are and your creator or your God, or um, whatever you see as a higher power. Form that relationship. For me, it's also the quantum field, between myself and the quantum field, and feed that. And that's going to give you a better foundation going forward, a better clarity and a more expanded view, because a lot of the world is out to tell us who we are and after our emotions. And you want to have a sovereign space that's not full of past experiences and full of past memories that trigger responses in our nervous system. So speaking to those and keeping those clear um, is important, and claiming that space as well. Um, Knowing that you deserve it, and hey, I have this blueprint in this field. I just need to call it into myself. So the foundation is important. Taking time to connect, to meditate, to claim your sacred space. Um, yeah, it's important neurologically. It's important energetically to the stored charges and experiences.
That's just wonderful advice. It's great advice on so many different levels, looking at it from a medical point of view, because we have to create that peace in order to heal and be fully functional. It's been such a pleasure to have you as a guest today, Steve. And I can't wait for your book to come out. So we'll keep our eyes open, and I'm sure it'll be out in a year or two, and then we can have you back on the podcast and you can talk about your book.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate the time.